Blackpine Mountain was the kind of place that existed in warnings rather than maps. Even cartographers seemed to draw it reluctantly, leaving jagged lines that clawed at the horizon. Shadow forests sprawling beneath peaks, jagged like broken teeth. Locals avoided the mountain in every season, and children were taught to not even wander near its base. For them, the mountain wasn't just dangerous, it was alive, breathing and watching. The stories whispered in village homes were never direct warnings, they were fragments, riddles, unfinished tales of people who had seen the impossible. Elliot, the documentary filmmaker with a fascination for the horror, arrived in early October, just as the first chill of frost was claiming the valleys below. He had traveled across 3 states for this expedition, drawn by fragmented legends of skinwalkers who supposedly roamed the mountain. He carried only a pack with essentials: a camera, a tripod, a few notebooks, a food rations, and a recorder. He had been warned not to stay too long, not to wander at night, but warnings were fuel for obsession. The first glimpse of the mountain was unsettling. Its peaks sliced into the grey sky like knives, veiled partially by low hanging clouds that twisted and rolled at impossible patterns. A pale wind swept down the slopes, carrying a scent that made his stomach knot. Pine and wet earth, but something else, a coppery tang, like old blood, and a faint sweetness he could not identify. It made him feel watched. The path to his intended campsite was narrow, bordered by sheer drops on one side and forest dense enough to block out the weak October lights on the other. Roots twisted across the ground like gnarled fingers, rocks jutted from the soil at odd angles, and the fog clung stubbornly to every tree trunk. Elliot's boot crunched over frost-hardened leaves, a sound that seemed unnaturally loud in the oppressive silence. Birds did not stir, not a single animal called. Even the wind was hesitant. By late afternoon, he found a clearing just wide enough to pitch his tent. The clearing was ringed by trees twisted and blackened with age. Their bark was cracked and veined, and their branches clawed at the sky like desperate hands. The sun sank behind the peaks faster than he expected, leaving the clearing in a deepening gloom that seemed to absorb his flashlight beam. Shadows stretched unnaturally long, warping in direction that made no sense. Every sense he had was heightened. The smell of pine mixed with decay, the cold air beating his lungs, the distant groan of wind slipping over jagged rocks. As he set up his tent and unpacked his camera, a faint, almost imperceptible whisper brushed his ears. He froze. The wind was calm. There was nothing moving here. Yet the harsh voice reached his consciousness.
Help me, I'm scared. I'll go home.
Elliot's heart hammered. His rational mind insisted it was the wind, perhaps a trick of his own imagination, but the words were too precise, too structured to be natural. He scanned the clearing with the flashlight, swinging slowly. Thick fog moved at the edges of the beam, and then, very briefly, two red glimmers appeared in the trees across the clearing, gone before he could focus properly. He told himself he was being paranoid. He had been alone in the wilderness before, and yet something about this forest was different. The trees seemed to lean closer when he wasn't looking, the fog curling like fingers around his ankles. Each time he set the flashlight down, the clearing seemed darker. By nightfall, Elliot had prepared a small fire. The flames crackled, offering a fragile sliver of warmth and light. Yet even as he sat beside it, documenting his thoughts into his recorder, the whispers returned layered, faint, almost imperceptible, but undeniably there.
Stay, it's coming. scared.
The words seemed to come from nowhere, echoing as though the forest itself had learned to speak in broken phrases of fear. Elliot pressed the record button, leaning closer to the fire, heart racing. The whispers were distant and insistent, overlaying one another in a rhythm like a heartbeat, unrelenting. He scanned the clearing repeatedly. Shadows flitted at the edge of his vision. Roots shifted under the snow, and frost giving the illusion that the ground itself moved. Unable to sleep, he took out his notebook, attempting to sketch the trees and layout of the clearing. But the shapes refused to obey him. The forest seemed to twist on paper as his pen moved, trees elongating, shadows bending at unnatural angles. Each page looked different than what he had just drawn. The form somehow altered. The whisper continued whispering his name, pleading and crying and begging to be heard. Around midnight, the wind picked up. It carried not just the smell of pine, but something iron like, warm, almost vicious. The fire flared once and nearly went out. Elliot swore he saw movement at the tree line. A figure crouched. The limbs were bent wrong and eyes a faint red. He blinked and it was gone. Every rational thought argued it was fatigue, yet the feeling of being watched, of being surrounded, refused to leave. Hours later, Elliot heard a distinct snapping of twigs, deliberate and heavy, far too precise to be an animal. He aimed his flashlight. Nothing. Then came a series of torture phrases layered over one another, as though a dozen voices had become just one in an instant.
Help me, I'm scared. My leg is broken. Stay away from me, please.
Panic gripped him. His rational mind screamed at him to stay calm, to remember he was safe in his little clearing. But his gut twisted. Something was out there, circling, watching, waiting, and it knew his fear. By dawn, Elliot was exhausted, trembling. The fog had lifted slightly, revealing the twisted canopy above. The fire had burned low, leaving only smoldering embers. He looked around the clearing with a new, uneasy understanding. Blackpine Mountain did not merely shelter the Skinwalkers, it protected them, fed them, shaped the fear that made humans walk themselves into madness. Elliot packed what he could, took a deep breath, and prepared to venture deeper into the mountain. He had come for evidence, for footage, for the legend, but already he felt he was walking into something that might not let him leave. The mountain exhaled around him, branches stretching at his jacket. Whispers followed him as he climbed, fragmented but persistent.
Help me. Mom, don't run away.
And as the sun rose behind the jagged peaks, Elliot realized the forest was no longer a passive observer. It had noticed him, and it was patient.